Apple is losing the AI model race. The problem for everyone else is that the model may be the replaceable part. Apple's own models don't lead the market. It is reportedly paying Google around $1 billion a year for help from Gemini. And the version of Siri it has announced can draw on outside models when it needs them. By the scorecard everyone has been watching, Apple looks weak. But Apple owns the iPhone. Once an assistant is expected to act, the phone controls access to the system where the job actually happens. A model can understand what you want, but the operating system decides how far it can go. If Siri controls that access, Apple can change the intelligence underneath it without giving up the relationship with the user. OpenAI can't replace the iPhone nearly as easily. Siri has spent years as the joke in this story. It could still become the system layer that calls on much smarter models. This is bigger than an Apple comeback story. It points to a change in the AI competition itself. The assistant with the best model can still lose to the assistant with permission. I call the layer behind that permission the rails. China has already run this experiment at scale. The same rule is now moving onto your phone. Benchmarks made sense when AI mostly lived in a chat box. You asked a question, judged the answer, and the task ended there. Now, ask AI to change a flight. The model may understand the request immediately. Completing it means getting into the airline's system and being allowed to alter the booking. If that access is missing, better reasoning doesn't help. This is the hidden bottleneck. The rails are the permissions and the service connections that carry a request from the assistant into a real transaction. Most AI demos glide past this because success is invisible when it works. When it fails, the assistant stops and the job comes back to you. Platform companies start with an advantage because they already control the environment around the model. A lab can spend billions making its AI smarter and still get stopped at a permission boundary it doesn't control. Once action becomes the goal, access becomes part of the product. China has already shown how powerful that can be. Alibaba's Kun app crossed 100 million monthly users roughly 2 months after its public launch. Baidu has reported 200 million monthly users for its own assistant. The scale is impressive, but the more important detail sits behind the chat window. These assistants are connected to service networks their parent companies already own. A request can become a purchase or a booking without forcing the user to start over somewhere else. That changes what better means. A slightly weaker model can still be the better assistant if it reaches the end of the task. Each new service connection adds usefulness even when the model itself doesn't improve. The ecosystem owner also gets an advantage that an outside model company has to negotiate for. Alibaba doesn't need to ask Alibaba for access. So, these adoption numbers tells us more than how many people want to try AI. They show that what happens when the conversation is attached to working infrastructure. Model prestige matters less when the one assistant finishes the job and the other gives you instructions. WeChat takes that logic much further. Tencent is testing an AI agent inside WeChat. The prototype can move through more than 3 million mili programs. In one reported demonstration, a user asked it to find a cafe, and the agent placed the order without sending the user into another app. The coffee order is almost beside the point. WeChat already sits between roughly 1.4 billion users and a vast service network. It has the identity and payment relationship needed to turn a recommendation into an action. The agent isn't entering a new market, it is inheriting one. Tencent doesn't need to persuade the outside world to build around its AI. It can make the AI a new interface for the world WeChat already controls. Calling this an AI operating system is very literal. If users begin with the agent, Tencent gains another layer of influence over which services they see and where the transaction stays. Tencent's shares jumped 10.5% on the news, their biggest one-day move since 2022. That reaction makes sense if investors saw the agent as a new interface for 1.4 billion users rather than another chatbot feature. This is where many people outside China tune out. WeChat is a super app and we don't have one, so this must be a China-only story. Except the super app only makes platform power easier to see. Splitting that power among several companies doesn't make it disappear. Outside China, the same functions are divided among different platforms. Apple or Google controls the phone, while the services and assistant needs may sit somewhere else. Because no single company owns the whole chain, the system feels open. For model companies, that often means several gatekeepers instead of one. OpenAI and Anthropic may build leading models, but they are still tenants wherever they don't own the underlying platform. Apple sets the depth of access on the iPhone. Google has the same leverage on Android. The same problem appears whenever an assistant has to cross into somebody else's system. Even a hugely popular AI can't award it itself system privileges. Most people will never experience this as a battle over platform power. They will notice that one assistant completes the task while another sends them back into an app. After that happens a few times, the technical reason stops mattering. They will keep using the assistant that makes them do less work. This is how the rails become market power. No dramatic lockout is needed. Small differences in friction, repeated every day, are enough. China puts that control inside highly visible super apps. Western platforms spread it across devices and services, where the same constraint is much harder to notice. Now return to Siri. Apple doesn't need the best model if Siri controls the point where a request becomes an action. From there, Apple can set the terms for any outside intelligence that want to operate on the device. OpenAI could win the model race and still end up as a companion inside somebody else's assistant. So, which AI is smartest is becoming an incomplete question. The better question is which AI is allowed to finish the job. China has made that power obvious because so much of daily life sits inside a few platforms. On your phone, the same power is buried in the operating system. You may see a menu of assistants and feel that you are choosing freely, while the important limits are already in place. By the time your AI can act for you, the decisive choice may have been made by the company that owns the rails. Headlines fade, variables remain. This is variable field.